I was a college dropout who originally wanted to go to school, get a business degree, and then get a high-paying job on Wall Street, and then save a bunch of money, and I was going to quit that job on Wall Street and then go after my true dream, which was entrepreneurship. However, I didn't know what type of business I was going to go into. I had no product, no talent, or no service to offer, but I knew I would be in business. And so something happened freshman year. I went to Howard University in DC, and I realized how student loans work and that I would graduate north of $100,000 in debt, and it just didn't, I could not accept that. So I figured if I'm gonna go for something so high risk like entrepreneurship, why not just cut a few steps out and then go for it now? I was 19 when I left school, and I figured I had enough time to go back and finish if I changed my mind and if the entrepreneurial route did not work out. And so there's this recipe that's been in my family for years. It was passed down to me from my great-grandfather, who was a master chef for Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line, and he was a Jamaican immigrant who came into America through Ellis Island, which is part of the reason we named it Ellis Island Tea. And I got the recipe from my father, and before my great-grandfather died, his instructions were for the recipe to be sold and not told, which means put it on the market. So I figured this could be my ticket to entrepreneurship. And so I asked for the recipe, and it took me, it's never been written down, so my father knew it by memory. He would make it for all the family gatherings, and people would just go crazy. And they would come in just for the tea, to like Thanksgiving dinners. And my family is huge on my paternal side. And the last Thanksgiving dinner I went to, we had over 100 people show up to one house for dinner. And most of the people were there to experience this tea again. And so it took me, I made it every day for about a year. It took me 365 batches to get it good enough to sell. The first time I made it, it tasted horrible, the color was off. Like, it's a red tea. The first time I made it, it came out brown. And it was a very emotional experience every day, getting up trying to master this recipe. And it seemed like I just couldn't get it right in the beginning. And then 365 batches later, I figured, you know what, this might be it. And so I took it to a friend's house and made it. And I never told anybody I was working on this recipe. And my friends tried it out, and they gave me that same reaction that my father would get when he made it, so I knew it was ready to take to market. And then the question became, now what? How do you get it to market? What is the market? Where do I go? What do I do? And so I always sold snacks in school, from elementary, middle to high school. I was the one with the duffel bag full of candy and juice. Not supposed to sell candy in school. Got in a lot of trouble because whenever there was chip bags and juice boxes all over the hallways, everybody knew Naila was selling candy again. And so got called to the office a lot. I knew how to sell snacks. And so I figured, at this age, I've got this recipe. Why don't I just make tea at night in my mother's basement, wake up and load my trunk, like fill up a cooler with a bunch of bottles of tea, and then I'll drive around the city. And wherever I see people, I'll just get out the car and try to sell it. And that's what I did. And for someone who is 19, 20 with no bills, all I had to do was make sure I ate, I was making a good amount of money. I made like a couple $100 a year or a day. And again, that's good for someone who has zero bills. And so I did that for about a year, and then I realized I had this fear, and I was running from something. And that fear was walking into a grocery store and being rejected, because I had no idea what I was doing. And so I looked myself in the mirror and said, never again will you sell tea from your trunk. If you're gonna sell tea, it's gonna be in a store. And my dream account at the time was Whole Foods. And so instead of going to smaller accounts and then working my way up to Whole Foods, I just went straight to Whole Foods. I walked into a Whole Foods in West Bloomfield, and I had my tea, and I saw this guy stocking the shelf. I didn't know any of the lingo of the industry. I didn't know what a grocery buyer was. I didn't know, there was a lot I didn't know. So I had this bottle of tea which my label, I should have brought pictures of my old label. My very first label was a flyer that I would tape to, the first label was a business card from Vistaprint, taped it to the bottles. Then I upgraded and thought I was fancy and got some color put on the flyer and then would tape those to those bottles. So I walked into a store, hands shaking, and I'm like, I don't see any local beverages here, and you guys claim to be heavy in supporting local. Well, I'm a local beverage. What do I have to do to get on the shelf? And then the guy he took the bottle, he laughed at me, and he's like, you don't even have nutritional facts on here. Like, what are you doing? You've got a lot of work to do before you get ready to come into a Whole Foods. I said, okay, I understand. Is there an application? What can I do? So he sent me a link, and the application was like this thick. And I knew nothing about, it took me a year to fill that out. Finally got it filled out, got my shot at my first Whole Foods. And then from there, now I had to sell and get repeat buys. So I would go and demo every day. And I would do samplings until they sold out. So I was selling out every day. And so that was a great look. And so from then, Whole Foods Detroit was opening. They were opening up their first Whole Foods in the city. And so they called me and said, how would you like to be our featured local beverage? Your sales are really good. And they didn't really have many or any other local beverages in West Bloomfield. So long story short, I got to be the featured beverage in Detroit. And right now, I think I'm still the top selling local drink in the Detroit Whole Foods. Thank you. And this whole journey from day one has been trial and error. I'm still figuring this thing out as I go. And so from there, fast forward a little bit, I went into a shared commercial kitchen and got licensed there. And then fast forward a little more, we opened a production house. So now we do all of our production in-house in a brand new state-of-the-art facility, about 4,000 square feet. And we are in Whole Foods, Meijer, Kroger. We're in about 1,500 stores across the country, including Sam's Club. Thank you. So now for the rebranding. So like I said, everything has been trial and error from day one. And the first label that I ever had designed, let's see if we can find it here. So this label, I don't know if there's like a light beam. Here it is. This label right here was a label that I had designed from a friend. So I had like zero budget for marketing or anything other than ingredients and bottles at the time. So it was all about, like when the gentleman asked the question, what's a good budget? How do you know how much to pay for rebranding? It all depends on relationships and who you know and where you're at financially at the time. And so I had a friend who was getting his career started as a designer. And I came to him and I said, I don't have any money, but I need a label. What can I do? Can I pay you back later when I make some success with the company, or can I pay you in tea? So he told me, we don't know if you're gonna make it or if you're not. Like, how can you guarantee? And I didn't have an answer. So he's like, well, just pay me in tea and we'll figure it out later. And so he started asking me questions that I did not have answers to, because I had never pulled a market analysis, which is very important to helping to get a lot of those answers for the questions that Lucinda was asking. And so he's like, who's your target market? I didn't know anybody. My target market back then was everybody. And then we came up with this label, which doesn't really, it's not intentional. I just told him, I don't know. I just wanted to be clear and I wanted to look really cool and people would buy it. And so as you see the difference, like from here to here, this label, the new one, our current one, is a lot more intentional and it captures a lot more of our story. And so I'm gonna ask the audience a question. Can I have someone to define brand? Like what is a brand? What is branding? Can anyone define that for me? Identity. I like that. Okay. So me and my husband, when we were riding over this morning, I wanted to come up with like a really cool way to define it. And what we came up with is branding it's an elevator pitch. It's a visual elevator pitch for your product. So the attention span of consumers is very small. like a couple of seconds. So you've got like a few seconds for their eyes to skim across your product, and that without any words, just looking at your product on the shelf, that is your elevator pitch. Your label is your elevator pitch. And so we very intentionally, when I got the opportunity to rebrand, I'll tell you how that came about. I applied to have a business makeover on a show called Your Business that comes on MSNBC. And I had I've been trying to get a rebrand and a rebrand launch for quite some time. I went to Skidmore Studios, they're based in Detroit, and when he quoted me on how much it would cost, I was offended. But then again, I didn't know how important, like Lucinda said, you cannot skip on your label. Like, it's the first thing consumers see, and a lot of times it's the only thing. Like, you can't be everywhere your product is. And so I was offended, number one. Number two, I did not have the budget. He quoted me like 30 grand. And so with this makeover with MSNBC, I was able to get the rebrand free of charge. So Skidmore went ahead and did it for me, and it was a lot more intentional. So by that point, we knew our target market, and we knew, and there was a lot more answers that I had. And so they sat down and interviewed me and asked a lot of the questions, just like Lucinda asked up here. And we were able to go through that, and this is what we came up with here on the right. And based on our new launch, Sam's Club offered an opportunity to go in all the clubs in Michigan. And before the rebrand, they're like, yeah, the product tastes good, but we don't like the way it looks. So come with something better, something different, something that pops. We understand your product is different. And another question I was able to answer was, well, what is my product? How is it different? Well, Ellis Island tea is a Jamaican sweet tea. Raise your hand if you have ever had Jamaican sweet tea. And all of you who have your hands up, your answer should be because you've had Ellis Island tea. We are currently the only Jamaican sweet tea in the country. And so that's a key differentiator. And when you try the product, it's really unique. It's unlike anything you've ever had before. And every time I do demos, I'll try to ask consumers, well, what does that taste like? They can never put their finger on it because it's completely different. And so we wanted to capture the attention and to say, hey, we're different, but we had to do more than just put Jamaican sweet tea on the label. We had to make it pop. And so we put in our, for the Sam's Club bottle, it's a half-gallon bottle, and there's no other half-gallon glass bottle that's not wine that Sam's Club has. And the bottle here was very intentional. The fact that we use glass, it's nostalgic, it pops, it's different. And the most feedback that we get from consumers at Sam's, it's not about how good the product is. I mean, it's good, but all they talk about is the bottle. Before we even get to the label, it's like, oh my God, the bottle is so cool. You don't see this anymore. It's nostalgic. My grandmother used to make wine in this bottle. And a lot of people, they'll buy it and then reuse it. So people put pennies in it. They take the label off and put water in it. They're in love with this nostalgic bottle. And the reason we chose it is because my product has a story. It's traveled over years. My great-grandfather is a Jamaican immigrant who came into America through Ellis Island. And this bottle has traveled with him, was the story we're trying to tell. And the reason, like down to the colors, everything's very intentional. So instead of the label being white, it's a little off-white because it's well-traveled. And then if you look at the label, can you tell that it has a story to it? No? Okay, yeah. So you can tell it has a story, and you can tell it's well-traveled. It's a lot more intentional. The other one, I thought it was pretty, but it was not intentional. And so, yes, our target market is female, even though men consume a lot more. It's just based on my market analysis, women consume a lot more flavored teas than men, but it's not super feminine. So guys drink it too. And that was intentional as well. And so from there, when we got the makeover, year over year, our sales have increased by close to 200%. And that's all due to, thank you, that's all due to changing our labels. Like, we did nothing different, we just did a rebrand. We changed our labels and then got this new cool glass bottle in half-gallon size. Everything else was the same, and then our revenue increased year over year by close to 200%. And so now we got that opportunity with Sam's, and because the bottle was so cool and the label happens to be cool and the product happens to taste good that's inside the bottle, it's doing really good at Sam's. So after we got all the clubs in Michigan, then they called us back and said, hey, your sales are doing really well. We want to offer you a one-time buy, and we'll put you in all the clubs in the country for Memorial Day weekend. So we did that, and that was a huge success for us. And this is all based on us updating our branding and changing the label. And so now we're negotiating a long-term commitment with Sam's to go nationwide permanently. Well, not permanently, for at least 5-6 years is what we're working on now. And this is all due to a rebrand. So when I asked myself the question at the end of the day, was it worth that 30 grand? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it all depends on where you are. If you don't have access to spend 30 grand on a rebrand or a initial launch, then you just got to work with what you got. Like back then we started with a friend of mine who I couldn't afford to pay, and then we changed it when we could. So you are where you are at the end of the day. But yeah, that is my rebrand story. And if I'll attribute all of the current success that we have to the opportunity that we had with Skidmore Studios, and they're based right downtown Detroit. And if you guys want to check them out, I think you should. How many people already have products on the market so that's everybody. And as far as branding, how many of you guys have intentional, like how many of you were very intentional with your design? And is it working out, or are you guys thinking about, yeah? How many of you have that budget to put behind that rebrand? Yeah, I guess. I mean, you are where you are, and you just got to work those networks. But just wanted to come and share the story on my rebrand, and it was very successful for us. Thank